So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the webinar. My name is Jan Eric Santos, and I'm a governance and digital risk manager at CGBC with more than 10 years experience in IT governance and information security. Now, NIS2 is the EU-wide legislation for cybersecurity, and some of you might have heard that Ireland has missed the October 2024 deadline to fully transpose NIS2 directive into the Irish law. Now, others may assume that since it hasn't been fully transposed, compliance can wait. But this webinar takes a different perspective, examining the signals that points towards a more progressive enforcement and why early preparation is essential. So as we go along with the webinar, we'll look into what NIS2 actually is, whether it reaches your organization, whether it's relevant, its requirements, and also different approaches to achieve compliance and the practical path to being ready. So in Article 20 puts emphasis on governance and leadership accountability. So there were three key focus areas that everyone should be aware about when it talks about NIS2. And NIS2 moves the accountability of cyber risk to senior management. So previously, uh, it all revolves around the IT function, but now it moves to the top management. And later on, we'll have it discussed that there might be some personal consequences that comes along with it. Risk management, or under Article 21, focuses on risk management measures. So this describes the proportionate implementation of cybersecurity controls that should be in place and mandatory controls such as incident handling, business continuity, supply chain security, MFA, and the likes. And as we go along to the Article 23 of incident reporting, so this is also one of the key important clauses that we should be aware of under NIS2, which is timeliness isn't just courtesy. So it is now a mandatory requirement to report significant incidents. Now let's look on to the timeline of and the history behind NIS2. So the first adoption of NIS2 was on late 2022, and the transposition, as I mentioned earlier, the transposition deadline has passed in October 2024. Now let's skip the 2025 for a while, and there is a potential expectation that the Irish enactment and entity self-registration would happen in the late 2026. Now, what we need to understand and what we need to focus on is what happened in the past year. So in 2025, the European Commission sent a reasoned opinion to Ireland for failing to uh, notify the full transposition of NIS2. Now, what does it mean for us? It means that it's just a step just a step before the case is put on Court of Justice of European Union. So that means there's a strong push coming from the European Union for this Irish law to be enacted. So what I would like to highlight is a month after this, the National Cybersecurity Center, which spearheads the National Cybersecurity Bill, published the draft risk management measures as the minimum baseline of what organizations need to do, and also announced the Cyber Fundamentals, which is the framework that aims to assist in NIS2 compliance. So what can we see behind this act of the regulatory bodies related to it? So the message is clear. Even the ahead of the law itself, the tools that we need and the information that we need in order to be prepared in NIS2 compliance have already been put into place so that there is an expectation that each and every organization are fully aware of what is coming. Now, we look into sorry, what is NIS2 and where is it coming from and where are we now at the moment? Now we move into does NIS2 applies to you? So uh, As compared to the NIS1, NIS2 is driven and expanded its scope whereby it's approximately extending the scope to 452 up to 6,000 Irish entities. And it's divided into essential entities, which covers, and also important entities. So as you can see in the screen, so there's a lot of industry sectors that is being covered. And also there's a size and turnover or revenue threshold that comes along with it. So anything on the energy, health, banking, transport, and under those essential entities, if they fall a little bit below of the 250 employees or 50 million turnover, they fall under the important entities. But and what is the difference between the essential and important entities? So the impact of being classified as essential is under supervision and administrative fines. So definitely the caps of fines differ. But what I would like to emphasize is the way the supervision is being applied. On essential, it becomes proactive. That means the regulatory body can do a proactive audits and the like. And for important sectors, it can be reactive. So if there are any indicators that may show that of potential non-compliance, then these sectors may be subject to being audited. Now, some organizations may not fall under this category through sector or size, but you may want to hear more about the supply chain hook and the opportunity that comes along with it over the next slide, because it's not only the size and the sector that matters, there are also other loopholes that other organizations fail to notice, and potentially it carves them out and get hooked into NIST compliance. We'll talk about it in the next slide. Before that, so how much and what is the cost of non-compliance? So for the essential entity, the cap is at 10 million or 2% of the global annual turnover, whichever is higher. So if you would notice, there's also a caveat about percentage. So in terms of the scale of the companies, the percentage would apply. So regardless whether you follow the 10 million or the percentage, it scales up and down and regardless of the size. And what draws regulatory attention? So there are six weaknesses that regulators actually look at. So most of the organization across the other EU countries exhibits weak cybersecurity governance, poor risk management, failure to report incidents, inadequate supplier oversight, lack of board engagement, and absence of documented controls. In Germany, for example, one of the telco company was fined with 15 million euro for failing to monitor a partner agency. So that is inadequate supplier oversight, and another 30 million just for the security deficiencies. And also in the wider Europe, there's a 55% increase of publicly known ransomware attacks in the first 4 months of 2026, with manufacturing as the primary target. So that shows that cybersecurity landscape is changing nowadays, and that's why NIS2, the implementation of NIS2 and transposition of it as the Irish law, and organizations being prepared for it is actually happening. Now, to take on what I've said earlier about the implications and the being part of the scope, let's talk about real world scenarios. So one case would be, we're a lean managed service provider. Does it applies to us? Because obviously, if you're a lean service provider, chances are you operate in a scale that has maybe less than 50 employees, or your turnover may be below the threshold. Now, managed service providers fall under the NIS2 sectors of high criticality. But if it goes below the threshold, then most likely you will be out of scope. Now, under what circumstance you get into the scope? So this is one of the circumstance where MSPs of a small scale can be hooked into NIS2 compliance. So first one would be if the national competent authority in Ireland, in our case, would be the NCSC, determines that the disruption of your service could have significant impact and designates it under Article 2, despite the small in size. So meaning your service might have been assessed by NCSC as a significant service that may result to disruption of a service of probably an essential industry or an important sector, and at the same time, uh, it can potentially harm public safety or public health. So there is other perspective where MSPs can be pulled into regardless of the size. Another scenario is we deliver a service to an essential entity. Does it applies to us? So even if your service is not considered as essential or important by nature, but your service is being offered to an essential entity or an important entity, you may not be directly subjected for NIS2 compliance, but you may be hooked with the supply chain requirements of these entities. What does it mean? So when essential entities and important entities gets on board in compliance with NIS2, majority of their procedures involves supply chain management, and that chain management would enforce a level of maturity of their supply chain in order to make sure that proper cybersecurity measures are being in place. So if you are not prepared in what's coming, then you might also miss the opportunity to be ahead of the curve by the time that this essential entity and also important entities looks for suppliers and vendors who have a mature cybersecurity environment. Now, in that landscape, from the point in 2022, changes in 2024, and also the updates on 2025, what does it tell us? So, what it shows us is the Irish regulatory environment is signaling an expected progressive enforcement model. So, it starts with sharing out the guidance, even if, despite the fact that in 2024, the Ireland has failed to fully transpose NIS2. Some of you may not be aware that a general scheme of national cybersecurity bill has already been published. So that is the draft of national cybersecurity bill. That means that the Ireland has already been transparent on what's inside the national cybersecurity bill for every organization to be able to see. And at the same time, in 2025, they have published the draft risk management measures, which is actually an assistance in order to identify what measures, what controls, and what processes is needed to assist the organizations to comply in this too. And lastly, in 2025 as well, they announced the Cyber Fundamentals, which is a voluntary tool for each and every organization. So it will be easier for everyone to self-assess themselves onto NIST compliance. So it's quite really handy, to be honest, in order for us to have that like long gap and in order for us to have an understanding of what is to come. And the Irish regulatory bodies gave the organizations the opportunity to understand, digest, and eventually prepare. So the objective is actually resilience and compliance. So regulators would rather fix your process than fine you. So that's why there is quite a long period of time where information is available to us. But the problem is once it's in, remediation, escalation, and penalties comes after, which may probably sting a bit because of the how heavy it is and also the possible consequences of non-compliance. So let's look at a deeper dive on what NIS2 is all about and what does it makes it different from other framework and also other regulations. So one of the uh, key key clauses in NIS2 is leadership accountability. So as per Article 20, so it's actually a cultural shift. So management must approve, oversee, understand, and demonstrate cybersecurity measures and governance. So it's no longer a responsibility of IT function alone. And also delegation is no longer a defense for top management. In the general scheme of national cybersecurity bill, even if it's a draft, you would be able to have an appreciation that this is basically it in terms of the enforcement. There is also a probability that management may be mandated to publicly disclose the identity of the legal person that is personally liable for gross negligence of cybersecurity incident. So let me reiterate that. So the identity of the legal person, that's naming and shaming. So it's really important that this is significant consequences. But one of the key term is gross negligence. So definitely there is a lot that needs to be in play, and there's a lot perspective that needs to be considered for it to be a gross negligence. But at the same time, it shows the seriousness of the consequence behind it. Another important article under NIS2 would be the mandatory incident reporting. So, where organizations need to follow a timely notification and reporting of significant incidents. So, when we say significant incidents, so it is capable of causing severe operational disruption of the services or financial loss for the entity concerned. Another definition of significant incident would be it is capable of affecting other legal person by causing considerable material or non-material damage. Now, what is really important here to look at is that the 24 hours window of disclosure and notification is a bit short when you receive some information as to potential instance of significant incident. So it's really important that organizations need to prepare and decide who shall declare this notification and how we are prepared into the process of doing the incident notification and also the reporting where we perform the assessment, impact analysis, and also mitigations in the event that this has been considered as a live significant incident. How do we react on that? And how do we deal on that when the time comes? So a few routes to NIS2 compliance is available for everyone, which is majority of this approach has been adopted by most of the organization. One would be standards led, risk led, and crosswalk led. So what you see at the top is the article or the requirements of NIS2 that is distinctively uh, requirement of NIS2 that cannot be easily go away. Now, majority of the organization looks into these three approaches when dealing with NIST compliance. So let me talk through on each of them. So standards led is where organization build an ISMS where they define scope and align or map NIS2 to the Annex A and eventually use the certification vehicle in order to maintain its ISMS and at the same time hitting two birds with one stone of NIS2 compliance. The second approach would be risk-led. So this is often a less costly option, but at the same time uh, quite difficult to maintain in the long run. So what happens is that as you look in your existing organization structure, you look at it in a defensible manner whereby you identify which area poses a gap on NIS2 compliance and address it as it is in terms of prioritization, remediation, and review. So it's more of like specifying what gaps you can address and what is not. Now, the last one would be crosswalk led. It's also being adopted by some organization, which whereby if you are already adopting certain frameworks such as NIST cybersecurity framework or Center for Internet Security framework, and also if you manage to be able to see the voluntary tool that was issued in 2025, which is Cyber Fundamentals, you can bridge the gap of your activities and your process into NIS2 compliance and eventually come up with an integrated reporting. Now, one of the most practical approach that majority of the organizations that we have came across with starts to adopt the standards-led approach. ISMS as a operating chassis, since the overlap with NIS2 is so high, it also signals conformance and trust through the certification from a supply chain point of view. So once you have the ISO 27001 certificate, it also demonstrates that you have conformed into a certain standards of maintaining or and managing your cybersecurity risk. And it's also available, and the ISMS framework is also can be overlapped with other regulatory requirements such as DORA and also NIS1 requirements as well. So that's why it's more practical for organization to utilize that vehicle. But obviously, just want to put a caveat. So, being certified as ISO 27001 doesn't necessarily mean that you are already compliant with NIS2. There's a practical approach in order for you to map those controls in Annex A of ISO 27001 in order for you to get complied and address those key gaps that you see at the top for NIS2 compliance. But at the same time, the vehicle is there, the chassis is there. You just need to tweak it a little bit. Now, what is ISO 27001? So it is a management system, so it's not a checklist. So it flows through, covers through governance, risk management, security controls, and focuses on documentation, continuous improvement, and eventually certification. Now, what you can see about this is the system that builds around ISO 27001 is somewhat closely mirror the requirements of NIS2, only except to those three articles that I've mentioned. So there is most NIS2 requirements can be addressed through a mature ISO 27001 implementation. If we look at NIS2 and ISO 27001 working together, NIS2 is a regulatory requirement, 27001 is a management framework. So NIS2 may be mandatory, but for 27001, everyone can get on board on it. It's voluntary. So for NIS2, not everyone may be under the scope, but for 27001, it can be voluntary so that you can demonstrate how mature are you in terms of managing information security. In NIS2, there is regulatory oversight and fines, but for 27001, definitely there's not. But there is a third-party certification that is involved alongside with it, whereby uh, it is an attestation to show that at a certain point there is a conformity that is being achieved by the organization of building that ISMS environment. Lastly, would be the focus of NIS2 is on compliance. Each and every member states are expected to have that level of cybersecurity measures to be put in place. ISO 27001 focus on governance that is fundamental for NIS2 compliance. So build the ISMS once, and then probably you can enhance it as well, or you can start off with lighter frameworks such as cyber fundamentals as a alternative self-attestation route, and then eventually you can enhance and bridge the gap of those NIS2 requirements in order to have an integrated compliance program. So what is the recommended path to readiness? So the first one that organizations could do is to determine the scope and your classification. So it's really necessary for you to understand what is your services, your systems, and your suppliers, or what your customers are as well. So it's really important to understand, are you are you in scope of NIS2 compliance, or at the same time, do you perform service to those entities that requires NIS2 compliance, which their responsibilities may flow through you. So that's a good way to start and understand. Then second one is secure board ownership and sign off. So it gives the ownership and accountability from the board. Have a conversation about cybersecurity measures, have a conversation about NIS2 and what's coming and what is expected, what is the requirement, because this gives a lot of consequences if senior management would ignore it and would be negligent about it. And then next would be assessing the gaps. So understanding the controls and governance against NIS2's risk management measures. And if you're applying a standards-led approach, you can do it. You can do it all together. So looking at it in a way that working side by side. So once you build the scope and identify the gaps, you can extend your ISMS in a way that it's the level of maturity adheres to what NIS2 requires. And then lastly would be the deployment of ISMS designed for the outset to cover NIS2 specific measures. So for example, the NIS2 builds on incident reporting on a risk-based approach, but in NIS2, it has to have a timeline for significant incidents. So that's only the small piece, small but relevant piece that needs to be closed as NIS2 specific gaps. So one of which would be the incident reporting timelines, supply chain security, and entity registration. So entity registration is definitely a NIS2 focus. So if you think you will get in scope of NIS2, then it's also a requirement for the entity to be registered. And then lastly would be, which is a consistent part of the ISMS environment, would be the continuous improvement, embed internal audits, management review, and continual improvement cycle, so that ISMS, because ISMS is not something that you build at the onset and just leave it that way. So it's meant to be a reiterative approach and a means to review up to date, make sure it's up to date, and at the same time, enhance depending on the changes in the cybersecurity and the risk applicable to the organization. So, uh, you don't have to navigate this alone. So there are a lot of resources that is available. You have specialists. There are cybersecurity publications in under National Cybersecurity Center. The Cyber Fundamentals as well is also available for everyone to use as a voluntary tool. But what keeps you guided is specialists could give you or interpret your scope and obligations, so you would know exactly which requirements apply to you or which don't or don't before you eventually commit your resources. And then a clear read on where you stand today. So it's also good to understand an objective assessment of your existing governance and control, so that you are not like trying to identify, is this actually a gap or is it not? It's good to have a specialist guidance in order for you to have a more experienced uh, understanding of what is gap and what is considered as a process, just a process improvement. A prioritized plan built around your reality, so sequenced by risk and effort. So you tackle what matters first, because it's really important for you to understand which one is something that needs to be done first, which may be critical for NIST compliance. And then lastly would be hands-on delivery of your ISMS. So it would be good to have a practical implementation support that also closes NIST to specific gaps. You don't want to try and close NIS2 gaps in your environment, and at the same time you don't get expert advice from it, and there's a lot of misinterpretation that's happening at the moment. So it is really important that you are confident enough to understand and classify which is gap and which isn't. And then lastly would be uh, partner for long haul. So obviously ongoing audits, reviews, and improvement. So readiness is maintained uh, based on as what is mentioned in the slide. So it's not achieved once, and the compliance is a continuous and reiterative process. And we have to be prepared. We have to maintain it, and we have to demonstrate and best position ourselves when it matters. So I think that concludes the presentation, and I think I'll hand it over to Gary. So thank you very much, everyone. So for the Q&A. So I'll hand it over to Gary for the Q&A.
Just before you take over there, Gary, I just want to say we had a slight glitch there in the beginning, so I actually didn't even get to introduce Jan. So thank you very much, Jan, for the brilliant presentation. Jan, of course, is our governance and digital risk manager. So his details are there on the screen, and we will be sending out a recording of the webinar to everybody that registered afterwards. So yeah, if you want to take over for the Q&A, Gary, and just let everyone know the Q&A tab there at the top of your screen. There's a few questions in there already, but if you have any questions to address to Jan, if you would put them in there, that would be great. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks, Anya. Yeah, so there's a couple of questions in there. I think one of them, there's a few little bits to unpack, so we'll take that one offline and we'll get back to you directly if that's all right. But Jan, I think you partially answered this one during the session. Is NIS2 only related to ISO 27001, or does it also include design guidelines mentioned in IEC 62443?
Oh, definitely, there are overlapping areas with other ISO standards, but what is more closely overlaps with NIS2 is the ISO 27001. So that's why that's the one that we think more closely addresses the NIS2 requirements.
Very good, Jan. There were a few questions sent in by people that weren't able to make it today, so I'm just going to throw a few of those at you, Jan. One of our biggest customers sent us a security questionnaire citing NIS2. What is the best approach to deal with it if we haven't considered NIS2 compliance in our processes?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat it again? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So one of our biggest customers sent us a security questionnaire citing NIS2. What is the best approach to deal with it if we haven't considered NIS2 compliance in our processes?
Oh, okay, that's a good one. So, well, definitely, having a security questionnaire, you don't have to rush answering those questionnaires. So it's really important that to understand that if one of your clients has issued you a questionnaire, there is a probability that others might also send the same. So other customers might also do the same by issuing a questionnaire, and that is what I meant earlier on my presentation, which flows down the responsibility in the supply chain. So the efficient response would be to build an evidence through a basic ISMS, for example, or utilize the cyber fundamental self-assessment tool so that you can evaluate yourself first in terms of the maturity of what controls you have and measures that you have at the moment before answering their questionnaire. And that also gives you a reiterative response to this questionnaire in the event that you receive other questions in the future.
And I suppose an extension or maybe a bit of overlap on that question, Jan, but there's a lot to consider when it comes to NIS2 requirements. Where do we start and what should be the priority action on day one?
Oh, wow. That's definitely really important. But so and it's also beneficial for the entire attendees today. So two things, both are free. So first would be write down which of your services may potentially touch a regulated client, probably, and then assess whether like it's something that is in scope or not, and eventually, and then at the same time, put the cyber risk into the agenda of your leadership. So if you identified potentially that there is one of your service that is being offered to a regular, potentially regulated client of NIS2, then it's good for you to bring forward the cyber risk agenda to the top management and discuss it. So both those two actions are free. So you don't have to wait until for it to be done. So it's easily and these steps you've spent nothing, and it starts from there, because the accountability and the ownership of NIS2 compliance should start with the senior management, and conversation with them is also an important piece.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, there's two more questions here. So this is a good one. So given that NIS2 is not yet a law in Ireland, what justification is there for us to start the process now?
Oh, well, yes, yes. So there's a lot of dilemma going on about that. So and actually, like as I mentioned earlier, if you would see what is the development of NIS2, they actually gave us the organizations a number of like a long time for us to understand what is coming in the form of the General Scheme of National Cybersecurity Bill, and at the same time the draft risk management measures. So this prompt us that everything is available for the organizations to comply. Now, whether or not do we wait for it or do we prepare for it because we don't have a deadline, the challenge is there is also an external push coming from the European Union in order to, and it's only a single step behind putting it into the Court of Justice of European Union. And what does it entail? It entails potentially administrative fine for the Irish government. And that's why it's really important for us that uh, once it's enacted, the organizations should be ready, because definitely the enforcement comes after that.
Excellent, John. Thank you very much. There's one more, and it's probably an industry-specific question. We deliver IT for other businesses. What considerations do we need to focus on?
Oh, okay. So IT service provider might be the most exposed position in terms of the regulated entities, because it I would look at it into risk and an opportunity. So first one would be a risk, because the thing is, there is a probability that you might be providing services to a regulated entity, and this supply chain requirements may flow down into you, and so might as well. It's really important for you to look at in your existing processes that you have at least the minimum and baseline requirements in complying to NIS2, or at the same time evaluate your existing cybersecurity measures. But at the same time, it would also you can also see that as an opportunity. By the time NIS2 requirements has been put into the Irish law, majority of those, or technically all of those essential entities and important entities, would definitely revisit all of their supply chain and verify whether any of them satisfies the requirement. And if you are ahead of the curve, then it is maybe an opportunity that to get ahead and put yourselves in and have this opportunity to get some businesses across essential and important entities, because you have been prepared and you have already demonstrated your compliance as compared to your competitors.
John, thank you very much. That was excellent. I'll just take this opportunity to thank everyone again for joining. I hope you found the session useful. As Anya mentioned, we will circulate the webinar after the session. Before we fully wrap up, Jan, if you could just skip to the next slide. I would be very appreciative if, is the next slide there, Jan? Just to make sure. Yeah. Yeah, so just before you guys go, it'd be great if you could just scan the QR code with your phone, and there's just 3 very quick questions that we'd like you to answer if that's possible. But we'll leave that on screen there for a couple of seconds. Thanks again for joining, and again, we will circulate the recording once we finish up today.
Thank you very much, and happy to take on questions. Just in case you missed my contact details as well, so it's jan@cgbc.ie. So happy to take questions with everyone, and thank you so much for joining the webinar.
That's great. Thanks for that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.